Class is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, and welcome to the Cities Digital Consulting webinar, Build Along on AP Approval. My name is Jessica Welsh, and I'm the Director of Consulting here at Cities Digital. And today we'll be joined by Mitch Gardner, who's one of our consultants who helps a lot of our clients build out the solutions like we're going to see today. Today's webinar will be focused on building out a workflow that will facilitate the approval of AP type documents. So we'll go through everything you need in order to be able to build and implement this solution. It's intended to run as a build along, so if you feel like you want to follow along with us, go ahead and know that this will be recorded. So if you need to watch it later and you're not able to do it today, you'll have a chance to again later with the recording. So let's get started. All right, so let's talk about this webinar, as it's a little more interactive and different than some of our other types of webinars. So today we're doing a build along, which is intended to be a visual and audio guided building of a process. In this case, a workflow to facilitate approval of documents. We intend to have responsive help through the Q&A messages in this GoToWebinar. Our intent is that at the end of this webinar, you'll have a ready to deploy process. Whether it's just a test exercise for you or if this is something you're going to roll out live, should be ready to go at the end of the webinar. Throughout the webinar, we have Mitch online to answer any questions that you might have. So feel free to use the panel in your GoToWebinar interface that pops up. There's a questions panel that you can expand by clicking on the little arrow next to questions. You can type in a question and you'll get an answer. Our tips for success throughout this Build Along webinar are notate any advanced customizations that you want to finish afterward. Maybe just make a note of them on a piece of paper or a little notepad file so that you can keep up with the rest of the Build Along webinar. Also ask questions right away so that you don't get too far behind, and hopefully you'll get an answer and get back on track. And then feel free to provide feedback in the survey so that we can continue to improve this process. If you get totally lost, do know that the webinar is recorded so that you'll have a chance to watch it and go through and pause it as needed at your leisure at another time. Or you can set up an individual session with one of our consultants to help you finish up your workflow. All right, so let's look at the tools that we're going to use today to build our process. If you haven't already, now's a good chance if you're going to build along to log into these programs. We're going to use the Laserfiche client, the administration console, and the workflow designer. Now let's go through what the process looks like in a nutshell. Today we're going to build a workflow AP process, but this type of approval process where a document comes into Laserfiche and gets approved by several people before its final filing location, it could also apply to a lot of different processes. So these skills and these workflow activities can apply to things like contracts, compliance documents, expenses, time off requests, and records management. So here's what our process is going to do. Staff will scan in a file and fill out some metadata. Then we're going to route that document to a manager folder so that they can approve that submission. Then, if needed, based on dollar amount of the invoice that we're looking at, the director may approve or reject the submission as well. When everyone is finished, the document will be filed in that vendor's folder in the Laserfiche client. All right, so let's look now at what we're actually going to build. So we're going to build some folders in the Laserfiche client that are going to help us manage this workflow. These are just going to be containers that are going to be working folders until we get to the vendor folder, in which case we'll want a record of all the invoices that we've sent to a particular vendor. We're also going to create a template. So we'll create a Laserfiche template that will collect a few key fields of information for all of our invoices. And then we're going to create the workflow. The workflow is the piece that will send the document through several different people and finally store it in the final vendor folder. And then we'll run a test so that we can make sure to verify that our workflow is working as intended. All right, let's get started. I'm going to pop over to my virtual machine here, and I have logged into the Laserfiche web client, but if you use the thick client, it works the same way. You'll just add the folders in the thick client and create the template in the Laserfiche thick admin console. For those of you not familiar with the term, thick client just means the installed program, and I'm using the web client, which just means I'm accessing my Laserfiche repository through a web browser. Alright, so you can see I'm logged into my demo repository here, and I have cleared out this repository. I'm just working with the folders that I'm using for the presentation today. But if you have existing folders, feel free to browse down to your finance department or wherever you're going to place your AP process, and we'll create the folders at that level. Alright, so the folders we're going to need for this process are an incoming scans folder. This will be the entry point for all of our documents. If you already have one, feel free to use that one as well. I have numbered mine so that they sort in a particular order. They'll go to incoming scans, then the approval process, then vendors at the bottom. But you don't need to do that. I know a lot of people also put an underscore before their incoming scans just so it's always at the top. So whichever works for you will work for this process. Then we're going to have a folder, another folder called number 2, AP Approval. Again, the number 2 is optional, but I like to have it sort underneath incoming scans. And then we'll have an active vendors folder. Alright, and then once that's complete, go into the AP Approval folder because we're going to have a couple of subfolders underneath that. Our workflow that we're building today is going to have 2 levels of approval, departmental managers and the CFO. So those are the folders that I've created. If you have particular people who do your approvals and you'd like to name the folders for those people so they know which folder is theirs, feel free to do that instead. Or if you have teams that do each approval, feel free to put the team name on the folder as well. In our case, we have number 1, departmental manager, because they'll always get it first, and number 2, CFO. All right, once your folders are done, we're going to switch over to the admin console. In my case, I'm going to go to the web admin console, which is located under your username and management. And then it will just open up in another tab in your web browser. Alright, so within the admin console, we're going to go to metadata management, and then we're going to go to templates. We're going to create a new template. If this is your first time creating a new template, you just click this add button. Alright, and this template is going to be called invoices and bills, or whatever makes sense to you. If you use a naming convention with your with your templates, feel free to use the departmental or some type of abbreviation at the beginning of your template name. If you use descriptions, feel free to do that as well. And then you can choose a color for your documents that are going to have this template. So within the Laserfiche client, anytime you scan documents and apply a template, if you've chosen a color, the icons turn that color. So we can choose any color we like. Alright, then we're going to get to adding the fields. So these are the fields of information that people will fill out first when the document is initially scanned in, and then during our approval process. So we're going to add a vendor name field, and this could be a text field or it could be a drop-down list. It's up to you. Lists are nice because they don't require somebody to type out the whole name and they reduce typos. Text is nice because you don't have to add somebody to the drop-down, you can just type it in. So whichever your preference is, I'm going to leave mine text for today. The next thing we're going to do is the next field is an AP document type. So many of you have document type fields. They may be shared with other departments, but if you want to just create just the AP documents, feel free to create an AP document type. This is going to be a list because I can pretty well define which documents I'll have for AP. In my list, I have correspondence, W-9, and invoices. Let's pull that up so you can see it. So feel free to add a few. You can always come in later and add extra fields if you want to, if you have other field types that you want to collect under this template. The next field is the invoice date. So this is just going to be a date field. This is the date of the invoice. The next field is going to be invoice amount. So this is the total on the invoice, and it's going to be a number field. And the reason it's going to be a number field is that we're going to use that number to decide whether we have the CFO review the invoice or not. And if it's not a number field, then workflow won't be able to calculate greater than or less than. All right, the next field is invoice. Oh, it looks like these got. Oh, sorry, invoice number is text. So the reason invoice number is text is that a lot of times invoices are sent out with letters as part of the number or some sort of precursor. They might have a dash or another character. So we leave invoice number as text. But if you only had numbers, you could certainly use a number field as well. The next field is AP status. And this is a list field as well. And this is the field that's really going to drive our movement of the document throughout the approval process. So what we're going to do is create a list of all the different statuses that this invoice could have throughout this approval process. And these are really just the stages. So the first stage is pending or initial, and then it's going to be approved by the manager. In our example scenario here, we don't have the manager ever declining, so they'll either make any corrections needed or approve it. And then we have the CFO able to approve or deny this invoice. And then the final status might be billed, or if you have some processes that might happen after the approval, you can certainly add those here as well. Okay. And if you want to save your initial enters some clicks, you can put a default value in to your field as well. And that just allows it to documents to always start with a particular value. So in our case, I'll leave it blank. And then the last field is the CFO comments. So if the CFO does deny an invoice for some reason, we have a field here that can collect comments so that we are able to go back to the manager and say what it was that was the issue and needs to be fixed. And that's it. That's our whole template. These are all the fields we're going to need for this process, so we can go ahead and click Save. Now we have created our folders and we've created our template. So the next thing we're on to is our workflow. For this process, we're going to open up the Workflow Designer. And we're going to create a new workflow. Alright, so when we're designing in a Workflow Designer, what we're going to do is just start at the top and work our way down. So what I'm going to do is just have my whole workflow selected here and walk through the properties of each activity so that you're able to configure it on your system. So at the top, we're going to name our workflow. So this is going to be, I have the departmental abbreviation at the beginning, and then invoice approval as my workflow name. Then I have the workflow description. So if you feel like you need a little bit more of a description to help people clarify between similarly named workflows, this is a great way to do that. I have it says routed to manager and CFO for review and approval. The next thing to set up is the connection profile. So if you haven't worked with workflow before, it's really important to set up this way that workflow knows which repository it's connecting to and managing documents within, and then a username and password that gives it the correct security that it needs in order to manipulate those documents or work with them. Many times this is going to be a service account called workflow or WF. In my case, I'm using admin for my demo repository, but that way it's not a user's account who might have limited access rights or whose password might change. So to add a connection profile, you just click Add, and then you choose one from the drop-down, and then you'll validate and test it to make sure that it's able to connect, and then you click OK. I'm going to click Cancel in this case since I have two now. Alright, and then the next thing we're going to do is we're going to check this box under Business Process Options. This is going to allow us to publish this workflow as a business process. If you haven't worked with business processes before, they're workflows that can be started from within the Laserfiche client. This allows you to bring an invoice in, maybe fill out the metadata, double check it against anything you need to double check it against before you start the workflow. It's a little different than how some workflows start, which is on a timer or based on a document meeting a set of conditions. It gives the end user a little bit more control. So we're going to go ahead and check that. All right, that's all the properties we're going to set on the workflow as a whole. So now we're going to go ahead and start adding activities into our workflow. So I'm going to show you this strategy that I used to add each of these activities, and then as you go through and build this, you're able to do the same thing. So within the Laserfiche Workflow Designer, the toolbox for workflow activities is very long, and I have a hard time remembering all of the different names exactly. So I use this search button at the top a lot to find the activity that I'm looking for. In this workflow, the first thing we're going to start with is retrieving the field values of the document that was scanned in. That way we can use that information as tokens to fill out different things like a document name or document workflow, or I can use it to control where the document goes. So if I can't remember that it's retrieve field values, but I know I need the fields, I could type in field, and that narrows down my list of available activities, or I can, if I know it's retrieve, I can look and see what my retrieve options are. And then to add something to the Workflow Designer pane, you can just double click on it or click and drag. Once it's over here, it will be highlighted in yellow, which will change our properties pane over here on the right. So we're just going left to right as we add different activities to our workflow pane. As soon as we add one, we'll just go through the properties over here on the right. I like to rename my activities, which makes it easier for me to see what I did and what's going on with the workflow if I ever come back to it later, or someone else. If you ever need help troubleshooting or somebody else takes over that workflow, then they'll be able to tell what that particular activity is doing at each phase of the workflow. So I'm going to start at the top and rename retrieve field values to say retrieve field values space dash space AP invoice template. I usually clear out the activity description unless it's something very particular, just because I think that's unnecessary. And then I like to go to the fields area next. Click to load that. And then in our case, we're going to collect all of the fields from a particular template. And the easiest way to do that is to click the drop-down under Template, choose your template, and then click Select All. Select All is going to just allow you to get all of the fields from that template so that you don't have to worry about whether you have the correct ones later. You just know you already have all of them. I'll just click OK. So now you can see we're collecting all the fields from that template. The next thing we're going to add is rename. So we're going to name our documents in a way that makes sense, hopefully, to everybody. They include enough information that the document will have a unique name, and it will be something that people can tell what's in the document without having to open it if they were to find it in a search or go to that folder. So I'm going to add the rename activity from over here on the left. Then we'll be selected, and we'll go through the properties over here on the right. So we're renaming. I'm going to change my name to rename to date space dash space document type space dash space vendor name. That's what I'm going to have mine named. You can use any combination of the tokens and or text that you think makes sense. Again, I clear out the activity description, and then I'm going to build my entry name from tokens. So let's see what that looks like. I usually like to work with tokens in the token dialog, as opposed to this little tiny blank they give you in the activity properties. To get to that, I click on the button that's the token button, which looks like it has a greater than symbol on it, and choose the first option, which is the token dialog. This pops up a little bit bigger window where I can see what I'm putting into my document name, as well as gives me a list of all of the available tokens that I can kind of collapse and manipulate. So the first tokens in my list down here are global. So these are things that are just system-generated tokens, not necessarily having to do with what I'm looking to do in this workflow. So I usually collapse those by hitting the minus button. And then what I have left is my business process. So these are things that are collected when the workflow starts. And then the retrieve field values, AP invoice template activity. So in this case, this is where the field values that I want are located, and I'm able to add them to my document name. So to add them, you're just going to, I'll show you with an extra one here. You would just click on the token that you want, and it pops up at the top here. To add a space dash space, you would click after the token and add your space dash space. Once you have the name how you like it, you can see it right here. Just click OK. All right, so then we're going to get into some of the more detailed part of the workflow is next. I'm going to zoom out a little so you can get a little bit bigger view of what we're going for, and then we'll go through each activity configuration. So what we're going to do is we're going to set this up so that the document goes to the manager for approval, but then that there's a repeat that if the CFO needs to approve it as well, it will go back through the repeat process and go down the CFO branch. And if the CFO denies it, it's going to go back through and go to the manager. So we're kind of going to set up our workflow so that it has a few properties that might not make sense when you're first going through it, but that facilitate that type of repeat. All right, so I'm going to zoom back in, and then we'll go through each activity. All right, so the first activity you're going to add is a repeat. And this is actually going to go around several of your other activities. So a repeat is kind of like a starting condition, where it has conditions that you have to tell the workflow what it needs to do in order for a document to need to go through the repeat versus just let the document finish up through the rest of the workflow. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say repeat if not approved, or CFO approval is needed. That's going to be my name of the repeat. Clear out the description, and then let's go through the repeat conditions. All right, so this is what the document needs to meet in order to go through this repeat activity. So first thing you do is change this if all of these conditions are true to if any is true. And so that means if the document equals pending, so what we're going to do is choose that field AP status, so entry, and then we can go to our token, and there's our retrieve field values, and our AP status field. And we're always working on the starting entry in this case, so we never have to change this blue thing. And then we're going to say if it equals pending, it's going to go through the repeat. If the field equals denied, CFO, then it goes through the repeat. And then we have one other condition that we want this document to go through the repeat. And that is if the token invoice amount is greater than or equal to, that's found here in this dropdown, $10,000 in our case. Could be any amount though. If it's greater than or equal to $10,000, it should go back through this repeat. And then I know because I've set this up this way that the manager should have already approved it, but if it's over $10,000, it should go through the repeat. So I'm going to add one more condition here, which is if the entry field AP status equals approved by the manager. So the first time a document goes through, it's going to be pending. The second time, if it goes through the repeat, it should have been approved by the manager, but be more than $10,000. And then if it goes through again, it might have been denied by the CFO. So we'll click OK. And we can limit the number of repetitions here to 5 if we need to. That way we don't have to go through this process too many times. And then we're going to go through and add activities within the repeat. So the first thing we're going to add is to another retrieve field values. So we're going to add a retrieve status. So go ahead and add the retrieve field values into the arrows of the repeat, so right within that activity. And then I'm going to change the name to retrieve the status. The reason I'm doing this here is not for the first time it goes through, but for if it goes through a repeat to get the status updated. So I'm going to retrieve status, clear out the description, and add that AP status field. You can always use the search if you don't want to sift through all your fields. Click that, click OK. Then we're going to add a conditional decision. So this tells a workflow to go one way or the other based on what the properties of the document are. So you can drag the conditional decision over and put it again within the repeat activity. And this is just going to be, the name is going to be manager or CFO. So based on the fields of the document, we're going to go either the manager branch or to the CFO approval branch. Clear out the description. And then we'll configure the properties for each branch, and then we'll go through and configure the activities. All right, so click on the first branch. We're going to name that Manager Approval. And then we're going to clear out the description. And the condition for managers are going to be that it equals, the status equals pending. So it's going to be if all of these conditions are true, and it's going to be AP status, that field again, equals pending. And we'll click OK. And we're going to just double check we assign pending value in this case, just in case it's on a repeat. Oops. So we add assign field value, which is slightly different. Activity, then retrieve field values. And then we're going to name it assign pending value. We'll keep the current template. We'll add AP status field. So you choose that from the add remove fields here. You add AP status and choose the field value down here for pending. All right. Then we're going to go ahead and move that document from the initial scans folder into the manager review folder. So we're going to choose move entry as our activity. And then we're going to type the activity name, move to manager folder. And then we'll clear out the description. And then the neat thing about this activity is you can move a document, you can copy it, or you can create a shortcut. In our case, we'll leave it at move, but you do have options. And then we're going to choose the folder from our Laserfiche folder browser, which is this button with the 3 dots. And then you just choose that AP approval and then Department Manager folder. And that's it for that one. And then we're going to retrieve the CFO comments field, just in case this document had been rejected by the CFO. We're going to get that field information and provide it to the manager so that they can see what the issue was. So we'll do another retrieve field values activity. And we'll come up and name it. We're going to say the name is retrieve CFO comments. And then we'll choose that AP CFO comments field. And that just makes that available as a token in our activities. All right, so I'm going to scroll down a little bit more. Okay, so the next thing we're going to insert is something that maybe some of you haven't used, which is a business process step. What a business process step does is it allows us to insert information into that business process window in the Laserfiche client. So for things like invoices that you might have a high volume of, you don't want to send an email reminder every time an invoice hits the manager's folder. But another way that you can apply instructions or information on when a task was completed is to put that into business process details. So we're going to insert a business process step, which is another one of our activities over here. And it is also a container activity. And it looks like this. So you bring that over and put it under the manager branch here. And then we're going to go through the properties over here. So what we're going to name it is manager approval step. And this way in our business process details in the Laserfiche client, we'll be able to see when the managers started their approval process step and when they stopped it. And we'll also be able to give them some instructions. So we're going to clear out the description here. Our step name is going to be the activity name, but you could certainly use something else. You could specify a due date. I'm going to leave that for now. But then what you can also do is you can apply these instructions and they'll show up right within the Laserfiche client. So I'm going to just say, please review this document for accuracy and change the AP status field to approved. And I'm going to say approved space manager. All right, and then what we're going to do is also set the resolution. So this is done when the activity that we have in here, which is wait for manager review, is marked as approved. And what we have to do with our business process step is we have to add an activity that's going to happen in that step. And in this case, we're just waiting for the manager to mark this as reviewed or approved. So we have to add an activity within our business process step, which is a wait activity. And this just tells the document not to move on until the manager's approved it. So we're going to add that wait activity and then name it wait for manager review. Clear out the description. And then we just have to give it some wait conditions. We open up our condition editor. The only thing we're going to do, this is pretty simple, we're just going to wait for AP status to not equal pending. If we wanted to be more specific, we could also change this to say, wait for it to equal approved by the manager. That way it won't move on until they make that particular choice, as opposed to making a different choice that's not assigned to them. All right, so that's it for our manager approval branch. If it gets through the manager, it doesn't need to repeat, then it will go to the vendor folder. But let's go through and configure the CFO approval side as well, so that we have our whole workflow completed. Okay, so our CFO approval branch. So this is going to be for invoices that are over $10,000, and the CFO will get them. So branch number 2, we're going to rename CFO approval, and we'll set the conditions for this branch. We're going to set entry field AP status again. It does not equal pending because the CFO should not be the initial reviewer for any of our invoices. And then we're also going to choose the AP invoice template invoice amount. So that invoice amount that we had set up as a number field, we're going to choose that token. I'm going to drop down here and say it's greater than or equal to 10,000. Once it looks like that, we can click OK. Alright, so once documents get to the stage of being reviewed by the CFO, we're going to move them into the CFO folder. So this is a move entry activity. We'll rename it to Move to the CFO folder, clear out the description, and then we're going to choose the Laserfiche folder browser button again and choose the CFO's folder. And click OK. Alright, that's it for the move entry. Then we're going to add a business process step entry again. And that is going to be renamed to CFO Approval step. And then we'll use the activity name as the step name in Laserfiche. And then our instructions are going to be very similar to the manager. So please review the document for accuracy and change the AP status field as appropriate. And then I'm also going to note to the CFO that I would like them to add a comment if it's denied. So they'll also be able to insert a comment into the AP CFO comment field. And then what I'm doing is the resolution of this is again a wait condition being fulfilled. And it says wait for approved or denied by the username. And then it's has marked the document as approved or denied. All right, and then I'm going to add that wait condition within my business process step. So I'm going to add a wait condition, and then I'll rename that to wait for approved or denied. And then it's on the starting entry, clear out the description. And then my wait condition for this activity is going to be if it's approved or denied in that AP status field. So I'm going to click on if any of these conditions are true instead of all, because it has to be one or the other. It's not going to be both approved and denied at the same time. And then I just choose the status field equals approved CFO or the status field equals denied by the CFO. And then we click OK. All right, so then we keep going down a little bit because we have another conditional. So we have a routing condition here, so insert another routing condition activity or conditional decision. And then we'll rename that to approved or denied, because we want something different to happen if it's approved versus denied. All right, so our first branch we're going to rename to invoice approved. And it's going to say if all of these conditions are true, and it's just going to be if the if the field AP status contains approved. It could also say equals approved by the CFO. Invoice denied is going to be the next branch. So click on branch 2 and rename it to invoice denied. And the condition for this is going to be that the starting entry AP AP status field contains denied, or you could also put equals, and then you can just choose from the drop-down equals denied CFO. I'll click OK. And so we didn't put anything under approved because if the invoice is approved, we just want it to flow through right to the vendor folder. But if the invoice is denied, we want to set that AP status back to pending and have it go through the repeat again and go back to the manager. So that's why we set that back. All right, so that's it for the CFO branch. Then we have one last activity here, which is once everything is done and everything is approved, then we're going to move it to the vendor folder. So we're going to click another move entry, and we're going to move it to the vendor folder. That's going to be the activity name. We'll clear out the description, going to be a move. And then I'll show you how to do this. What we're doing is we're moving it to a place in the repository where one of the folders is always there, but then the other folders are dynamically created by workflow as needed. So what we're going to do is click on this button here, the Laserfiche folder browser button. We're going to choose our active vendors parent top folder and click OK. And then what we're going to do is add some tokens to make a dynamic folder path. I'm going to click on the token dialog and then the drop down. And what I'm going to do is create a dynamic folder path, which means that I'm just adding tokens to the folder path. So to create a subfolder in a folder path, I click the / button, which is the one above the Enter key. And I don't need any of these global tokens again, so I'm going to collapse that. I don't need business process. What I need is those field values that were part of our initial retrieve field value activity. So I'm going to expand that, and I can see there's all my fields from my template. So I'm filing my vendor information into active vendors and then vendor name. So I'm going to click on that token. And I'm going to click back into my top window here and click another subfolder. So under vendors, I'm also filing my documents by document type. So all the invoices will be together in an invoices subfolder. All right, so I'm going to have active vendors, then sorted by name, and then into an invoice folder. And then I just click OK. All right, so that's it for the workflow configuration. I'm going to go ahead and publish this. And then publish anyway. I changed my fields a little bit as part of my testing process here, but it should still work just fine. So I'm going to go ahead and click through to publish this. And then it will say published successfully. If this is the first time you've published a business process or this particular business process, you will also get a pop-up saying, who would you like to be able to start this business process? You can leave it at everyone, or you can narrow it down to certain people. And you can also set some options on how you would like to have a document start into this process. So you could set, just like you can with workflow conditions starting rules, you could set conditions that the document has to meet or that the particular metadata has to meet. In our case, I just left it wide open, so we can start that process on any document we want to. Okay, so last step is we're going to go ahead and start and test the process. So we go back to the Laserfiche client, and we're going to create a new invoice and then run it through our process. When I'm testing workflows, I often do it with a 0-page document just because it's quick and easy to test using just metadata. As long as you don't have any page activities, this should be fine. So you can just right-click in New Document. I usually rename it to Test 1 just in case I need to look at my workflow instance details, then I'm able to see my tests numbered through. I'm going to create this document in incoming scans. I'm going to choose my AP template. Oh, it's not showing up here. Let me just refresh my repository. Sometimes if you do create new things in the management console, you may have to either, if it's security, sometimes log out and log back in, or refresh your repository in order for your changes to show up. There we go, so invoices and bills. And then in the web console, I have to click here to fill out the fields. So I'm going to choose my vendor name. And then I choose my document type, right? This is going to be invoices. And I'm going to type in my date. And my invoice amount, I'll just start with something in the 500 range. We don't want to get too many things. And invoice number, this can be whatever it is on the image. And then our initial status is just going to be pending. And that's it. We create the document. And then what we should see is that it renames the file and moves it into the manager's approval. But first, what we have to do, because we're not using a condition, we're using a business process, is we get to start that business process. So in the web client, what you can do is you can view the metadata over here. And instead of the fields or a preview of the image, what I'm going to look at is under More, Processes. And then I'm going to be able to start a business process. If you're in the thick client doing this, you just right-click on the document, and then you're able to start the business process by clicking on the business process right-click option. All right, so I was able to start that business process. It said it started it successfully. So the next thing I should see is the document moving into the Department Manager folder. We'll just take a second here for it to show up. All right, so our document is here, and we can see that it was renamed effectively. And if we select the document, we're able to change our metadata here. So we can choose AP status equals approved by the manager. And then if we wanted to, we could also see the process information. So we'd be able to see, gotta save our template fields first. And then we can see our process information on what our instructions were and then what happened. So our history was it started, our process started, and then here's our instructions. And then we've approved this, so it should move on next. Since this is less than $10,000, it should just move on to its folder where it will be filed at the end once we click out of this metadata and it's saved and completed. So we'll go ahead and check the vendor folder. All right, so if we go down to our vendor for Staples and open up our invoices, you can see there's our invoice template, our invoice document. It doesn't have an image, but we can see all the metadata, and we'll be able to see all the business process details as well. So there's the approved by manager. If we go over to processes, we'll be able to see the history of this document. So this is really nice from a management level as well, so you can see how long it's taking for different documents to get through their approval process and who's gotten them at which times. All right, so that's it for the workflow demonstration. I'm going to pop back over to our presentation so we can just kind of get through the last bits here. So as usual, the resources that are available for especially workflows and processes like this include the Laserfiche Answers Forum, where you can ask or see a lot of answered questions. It's actively monitored by Laserfiche, so there's a ton of great information there. There's the Laserfiche Solution Exchange as well. They have tons of ideas on how other people have used Laserfiche to implement ideas that they've had and solutions that they've had, including detailed configuration information. And of course, the Cities Digital Client Portal will have all of our documents, the slides from this presentation, as well as all of our other webinars available on that. We hope you join us for next month's consulting webinar. It's going to be a build along, but this time for contract renewal processes. So we're going to go through the process of setting up a workflow that will monitor for contracts that are about to expire so that we can kick off different workflows or processes in order to get ready for renewal or expiration of contracts. That's going to be Thursday, November 15th, same time, 1 to 2 Central Time. And if you do get a chance, please fill out the survey for a chance to win this awesome t-shirt. We do appreciate your feedback and take into account before we plan our next webinars, so definitely fill that out. You can't quite see what's on there, but it does say the original computer with a pencil, and it says print on the sharpened end and delete on the eraser. All right, so that's it for today. Thank you, everyone, and we hope to see you next time.